Good thing you're here now. Well, howdy and welcome. I'm Bill Kroll. I'm chair of the classics department, and I'm pleased to introduce Andrew Reinhard, our speaker for today. I'd like to just start off on a small soapbox, because I've been thinking a lot about that phrase, non scholae discimus sed vitae. We don't learn for school, but for life. And that's one of the reasons why we wanted to bring in Mr. Reinhard, because he's a guy who is smart, well-trained, but has not been using his training for the things that he does right now. Right? In a sense, he's doing what your education is supposed to be doing, right? Training you in different ways to think about the world, to apprehend new and different situations, to be able to adapt intellectually. So he has not been straitjacketed by his training. As we'll see, there are maybe a straitjacket should be in order, but there are lots of variations on different intellectual themes, as you'll see throughout the course of his remarks today. Many different ways where his training has influenced the way that he approaches the world. One of our conversations this morning about some of the elements of his archaeogaming portion have now made me think twice about all those tombs that I have looted in Skyrim.
Loot the tombs. Don't do it.
So
you
anyway,
you can finish the quest without it.
That's true. There's a way to get. Yeah, I know it. But then, of course, if all the bad juju comes to you, you kill it and get more stuff, right?
Yeah, well, killing is much more moral than looting a tomb.
Right, especially if they're already dead.
Yeah, right. Yeah, killing an undead, okay.
Yeah. So, all right. So I'll get off my soapbox now, but I just wanted to. One of the reasons why I wanted to bring in a speaker like this, unlike most of our speakers each year, are classicists who are speaking on a specific topic, and they've all been fascinating work. But we want to do something a little bit different this year to help those of you who are smart but don't aspire to be standing in my shoes. To give you an opportunity to think about different ways of utilizing your education once you have walked across that stage in Big Sandy and had Dr. Top shake you by the hand. Okay, so now more formally on to Andrew Reinhard, who is to me very much like a periodic sentence in Cicero or in Thucydides.
Oh, that's a first.
Well, there are these balanced clauses that you expect the other passage is going to wind up, but there's always some confounding twist at the end. And let me give you a few examples. I promise none of these are from ChuckNorrisFacts.com. Is that close to using them? Right. So, okay, he's the director of publications for the American School of Classical Studies in Athens. Right? And so he's one of the main gatekeepers of our field, especially for the publication of material works. Everything from the Agora and from Corinth goes through his computer. Right? But on the other hand, he's a big proponent in lowering the bars of access and the fruits of excavation to non-specialists, including encouraging archaeologists to stream their discoveries via Google Glass, present schematics for finds to 3D printers. I actually saw this in use at the Archaeological Institute of America this past January. It was really quite impressive to be able to look at the way that that rams would have fit on the fronts of ships and to actually hold them and see the way that different things work together. He also shares information through sites like academia.edu and has been encouraging people to open access to publications right now after a 3-year embargo, but maybe even with less. He's been trained as a traditional archaeologist, receiving his MA at the University of Missouri Columbia, and having excavated in Etruria and Isthmia. But he also applies his acumen to the archaeology of gaming, at archaeogaming, or archaeogaming.wordpress.com.
Yeah, that's the blog.
Okay, and also on punk archaeology work, which we'll hear about in a minute. He does not teach, but he's very interested in the way that pedagogy works and has been working for years to try to move towards different ramifications, different permutations of e-learning. And he also has articles on using technology in the classroom, social networking with Latin classes, gaming for learning, and other sort of general improvements in pedagogy. His offices are in Princeton, which is a lovely place with apparently the best record shop in the world.
Oh yeah, the Princeton Record Exchange, you can't beat it.
Yes, but he chooses to do long backcountry expeditions, including last year a nonpartisan 30-day, 100-mile scientific survey of the North Dakota Badlands. And I believe there are pictures for that as well.
Yes, upcoming.
And even though he's a publisher of the soberest of sober texts, he has, he's written Psychonautica, a novel in which the philosopher and mystic Pythagoras hooks up with Jason and the Argonauts to defeat the Persian king Cambyses II, who, after capturing technology in Egypt, now has control of a zombie army. Check out his academia.edu page.
You can get it for free, because I can't sell it.
Yeah, spoilers, but it is a really wacky ride. Okay, so his talk today will likely be pretty wacky as well, so I'm looking forward to it. So let's give Mr. Reinhard a warm welcome for his talk. Classes outside the Academy, Punk Archaeology, Classification, and Adventure Science.
Thank you. That is the best introduction I've ever gotten, ever. Thank you very much, and you guys have been great, and I'll see you at the reception. No, okay. With archaeology, as Dell said, I guess I was classically trained in a way of studying Greek pottery, specifically pottery from Attica, and then did my archaeological training at Poggio Civitate, which is near Siena in Tuscany, and also at the site of Isthmia, which is on the Isthmus of Corinth, and working with the materials there, and so very much coming out of this tradition of doing it right and doing it in a particular way, and then as I've gotten away a bit from academia, and as I've gotten away from working within a university setting, and then also I worked for Polchesi Carducci Publishers that they do Latin and Greek textbooks, and then coming away from there, and then starting my career as a publisher for the American School of Classical Studies at Athens, I started to really consider what else archaeology could mean, and I've come up with some thoughts that I think are interesting, and when we go to the reception, I'm going to be talking for about half an hour, maybe 45 minutes, and then we can go downstairs and I'll answer all kinds of questions for you, because I'm interested to hear what you think about this kind of stuff. I'm not saying this is the way it is. This is a way that I see things, and so as we go, do ask me questions. The music that you were listening to was stuff that I wrote and recorded in my basement, and I did that at the request of Bill Caraher at the University of North Dakota, who's the godfather of punk archaeology, and we'll start off with that. And this is the address to the music. It's all free. You can download it and do what you want with it. But he asked me to write songs for an unconference last year in Fargo in February 2nd, which basically were protest songs about cultural heritage and archaeology and austerity measures and how they're affecting cultural heritage and things like that. There's a song in there about archaeologists teaching languages, because we always have to do double or triple duty, with that kind of thing, here at university. So I wrote those things. You can download them and listen, and that's a good segue into the first thing that I wanted to talk about. I'll be talking about three things today. One is punk archaeology. One is archaeogaming, and then we'll have time at the end to talk a little bit about adventure science and the archaeology of that. For punk archaeology, this is the handbill from last year's event by Joel Jonitz at the University of North Dakota. And as far as punk archaeology, I'll read you, it's not quite a manifesto, although one might expect with something like punk archaeology that it would be very provocative and all of this, but maybe it's not. Maybe it just makes sense. I'll read it to you. Punk archaeology is a movement and a set of practices that transcend the traditional discipline of archaeology proper. Punk takes its name from the do-it-yourself, DIY, rock and roll movement of the 1970s. Punk rock represented a new interpretation of traditional music, and this captured the angst of a rapidly changing world. In several ways, punk had points of contact with academia. Changes in the meaning and structure of urbanism, the dystopian impulses of late capitalism, and the full embrace of irony as the dominant trope in both popular and academic culture provided ample fodder for a dynamic, abrasive, and experimentally sonic landscape. Now, while many see the discipline of archaeology as the study of quote-unquote old things from a bygone era, the true meaning of archaeology is the study of material culture from any era, past or present. Practitioners of punk archaeology embrace aspects associated with this movement without recognizing the connection. Cyberpunk novels, steampunk designs, punk film and fashion, punk political movements, and more recently punk archaeology pedagogies bring scholars in non-traditional and non-academic audiences together. Exposing these DIY approaches range from a variety of field procedures to alternative methods for disseminating data and scholarly interpretations. And this ranges from transparency in interpretive processes to an interest in the recent past, the ephemeral in the landscape, and subjects that fall outside of and challenge the traditional purview of scholarly investigation. And I've got some slides here for you. On the left, we have R. Collingswood, who's one of the first punk archaeologists, and then we've got, oh my gosh, it's Diogenes. Diogenes was one of the first punks ever, and I would recommend that you go and look these people up on Wikipedia, which is now an okay place to go. You know, if you don't like Wikipedia, you can fix it because you can edit it. You know, see something wrong, fix it. It's good. But you know, we're growing out of a tradition of radical thinkers who are questioning the way, you know, how are things? You know, how's it going, and what can we do to change these? And you can take a controversial approach or a confrontational approach, or not. But we're reconsidering, you know, all the time what's in front of us and asking these kinds of questions. With punk archaeology, we're not only just talking about the theory behind using a DIY aesthetic and interpreting archaeological science. We're also doing the archaeology of punk places. And so, for example, you know, we've got scholars at Franklin and Marshall, Kostis Karelis, you know, who's studying the 101ers. This is the squatting house of Joe Strummer and the Clash, for example. What's going on with that building at the time that they were inhabiting it? What happened after they left? You know, was it demolished? Is it repurposed for something? What's going on there? At the top, we've got another squatting residence, you know, for punk musicians, and then down here, we've got another squatting residence saying this land is ours, not for sale. And so you were taking a look at the physicality or the physical materials left over from punk, you know, from the late 60s, 1970s, 1980s, and even into the early 90s, looking at the recent past and how these things have changed. And we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get into archaeogaming too. Other places, these are clubs that are no longer around. We've got Ralph's Corner Bar up here. This is in the Fargo-Moorhead area, Minnesota, North Dakota. And the show that we played last February was actually in Fargo, and a lot of old musicians and old people who used to go to Ralph's Corner Bar came here to basically record oral histories as part of the event. So we talked, we played music, and at the same time they talked about their experiences going to see shows at Ralph's. And you know what a shame is that there's no longer a music venue that people can go to see this kind of music. Same thing is true of the Uptown Bar and Cafe in the Twin Cities. And so, you know, it's an understanding of these places, of these structures. And you know, you think back to old archaeology, and we're talking about like going to temples or looking at old houses and how, you know, what happened to them, and the people who used them. And so the same is very true at this point. This is cool. I found this last week. This site's actually been around since 2006, 7, and 8. It's archaeological graffiti, and this one team photographed or put up cameras on this wall in Los Angeles, and they have a couple of these other ones in the LA area, and you can go through and you can pick the wall and you can pick a time, a year, a month, a week, and use a slider, and you can see how the art changes. You know, what was there before, how did it get painted over, and you can watch this over time. And that's something that we really can't see. We can see that to some effect when going through the archaeological record where we're digging down, you know, we're going through the Venetian level or the Byzantine level, or, you know, or into the late Roman and early Roman periods and down into the classical and archaic and the like, and you're going through floor by floor by floor by floor as you're going down. This is something very similar to this. It's almost like a stratigraphy of paint, if you will, and you're able to kind of strip it away because they've had these cameras in place for years to document this kind of stuff. And you know, as an art historian and as an archaeologist, you know, that's fascinating to me. And this is all open, free, online. If you Google archaeological graffiti, you can actually go and play with the sliders and see how things have changed. This is Iggy Pop's house, or it was. This is where he grew up. And again, you know, we're going and taking a look at these punk places. You know, looking at the origins of things, it's like, you know, going to Delphi and looking for the oracle or something. It's a sacred space, or these things are beginning to get a kind of sacred context as this cult of personality, in this case of Iggy Pop, is drawing people to find this place in Ypsilanti, Michigan, which looks basically as it did when Iggy was living there with his mom and dad. And so you've got something like that too, where we're studying the recent past and how things are being used and who's living there now and how did they acquire it and things like that. With the DIY aspect of punk archaeology too, we're thinking about taking action, you know, you guys might be familiar with Blue Shield, which is not punk but does some cool stuff. Basically, Blue Shield identifies cultural heritage sites which are under threat from armed conflict, and it puts rules in place to help protect those sites when a threat is imminent, whether it's going to get shelled or being used by insurgents or whatever. And so they'll put up signages, and they'll have one sign or 3 signs depending on the kind of message that they want to convey. And so it's incredibly useful. Sometimes you need to do it yourself. You all might have heard last year of Timbuktu, the manuscripts in Timbuktu, being under threat by radical Islamists who were coming in, and they were going to burn the manuscripts. And the international community saw this coming, and so the people who were working in the archives, taking care of these manuscripts, worked with governments in order to basically create almost like an underground railroad to save these things themselves. They're doing it themselves, packed into, I forget the number of trunks. It was something like 8,000, trunks, steamer trunks, and they pile the stuff in, and then over a course of weeks, move them out. And they were able to save most of them. The ones that you see here, the ones that were in the conservation area, they're ready to be conserved. So they did lose some of these things, but they were able to protect and preserve basically by establishing a community of people who were united in a cause. And that sounds very punk to me. And then you've got junk like this, and I'll editorialize for a minute. American Diggers on Spike TV, National Geographic Channel has something like this too. And this is really kind of what we're against. This other kind of DIY, where you're going into your backyard and you're bulldozing stuff, and then you're taking things because it's treated more like treasure than something of cultural heritage. And so, it's interesting, to kind of watch this stuff happen and to see what we can do about it, whether it's tweeting nasty things about them or going the anonymous direction, anonymous with a capital A, and trying to do DDoS and things like that. Not that I'm recommending it, but maybe. So think about it. When we had the show last year, it was the first on-conference for punk archaeology that we did, and again, this is the brainchild of Bill Carraher at North Dakota, Costis Corellis at Franklin and Marshall, Aaron Barth, who's a historian and archaeologist at North Dakota State, where they wanted to bring people together for a night of music, for a night of basically declamation and oration and oral histories too. So I did the CD for it. This is our band, the Filthy Trenchmen. Which was, well, it's a play on words. There's a band in the Fargo area from the 90s called the Dirty Frenchmen, and they're a stalwart band in Fargo, and so the Reisenauer brothers were part of this band, and then Mike Whitgraff, who's the chair of the music department at North Dakota, played keys. Aaron Barth, the historian and archaeologist, played drums, and I played the guitar, or tried to anyway. So we had this thing at a bar, a conference at a bar with lots of beer, and we invited the public in. Come in, see what's going on. And they did, and they had a great time, and they learned a bit. And so that was really special for us because we're trying to bridge the gap from what we're doing as archaeologists and historians and bringing that to a general public, which I think is really one of the best goals that we can do. How do we communicate archaeology in a way that people can understand and be interested in and maybe want to participate in as volunteers? And again, that's a very punk thing. Volunteer. Give your time. If you can give a little money, great. If not, we can try to do it on the cheap or on the free. And so with that, here's just some crowd shots. People are having a good time. This is Costis talking about the one-on-oneers. Here we are playing the show. It wasn't that blurry. Later it was. And we're actually getting a book out of this. Part of this was a publication plan where it's like, it's all well and good to go and talk and play a show and whatever, but what comes out of this, and what can we give away? And so we just finished, and we're going to put this out to print in the next month, the Punk Archaeology monograph, which collects things from the Punk Archaeology blog. If you Google Punk Archaeology, you'll find the blog. Collects those essays as well as the things that were spoken at the event. And then I think that's being released as an ebook and also as print on demand through the North Dakota Digital Press, which is a new startup which is intended to publish things very fast. I'm a publisher at the American School. We publish very slowly. We're getting better, but it's not great. So how do we publish on the fly and at speed with limited resources and a volunteer workforce? And so the press was created for that purpose, and this is our first book. All right. Well, let's segue over into archaeogaming for a moment. With archaeogaming, I'll read you a little bit about what that is. maybe not. But do you remember? You guys have seen Last Crusade, right? All right, call this archaeology. I was the next man. That's about the best Sean Connery I can do. With argue gaming, I play a lot of games. I play a lot of games. I do. I can't help it. And they're all fun, and they drive me nuts too. Because, and you'll see why in a minute. Is I'm interested in the archaeology in a game. You know, if there's archaeology to do, I want to do it in the game. If there's stuff, I mean, look at this. You know, you've got columns up here for older games. We've got columns down here for newer games and everything. Why are they there? Why ruined? What happened to these things? I'm very curious about this, and the games don't tell me a lot of the time. So I'm interested to see you know what's going on in game with art, with architecture, with history within the games themselves. I'm also interested in how games change over time. So you guys play Elder Scrolls? Yeah. Okay. Morrowind, Oblivion, Skyrim, and now Elder Scrolls Online's coming up, and I'm really excited because I was in the beta for that, and that was awesome. So we have a Morrowind Imperial soldier, and yes, there's a race of Roman type people called Imperials, you know, throughout the games, and they look like him. And taking a look at his uniform and comparing it against the uniforms in Skyrim, how have these changed over time within a game? And these games take place in different eras within that world. And so, you know, it's just like, you know, I'll show you pictures of pots in a minute. It's going to be awesome. But yeah, here we go again. We've got Morrowind Imperial soldiers, and then here's the Skyrim soldiers. And the detail on this is exquisite, and it's almost faithful to, you know, what you would expect to find, you know, through studying of Roman military clothing and uniform. Oh, here are my pots. We have a pot from Oblivion. We've got a pot from Skyrim, and both of these are of Imperial manufacture. Why did they change? What's the fabric? Where did I find them? Who's using them? Is this in a domestic context or not? And you know, maybe this is just me being an egghead, but I want to know. And one of my projects is to actually do a pottery typography within the Elder Scrolls universe to find out the different vessel shapes and where these are and why they're being used. And ultimately, and I'm really keen to see this in Elder Scrolls Online, is the fact that can I take this pot from this house, go across a continent, and leave that pot somewhere for somebody to use or find? Can I make middens of junk? You know, you get trash loot, right? You're walking around and you get like forks and knives and apples and stuff. It's like, who needs that? Nobody. And so you can just dispose of them, you know, just like, you know, they did in the olden times, right? You just throw them in a midden somewhere and they pile up. Well, can I do that in the game? And what does that mean? And can other people come and take these things? And how does the trade work? I don't know. But it's you know, interesting to kind of test economy, you know, throughout games like this. Also, games changing over time. You guys play Final Fantasy? There you go. Look, it's one. It's like 3 or 4. This is like 7, and you know, it just changes. And you know, what are the artistic decisions that are going on behind the scenes? You know, how are they figuring this stuff out as game designers about making this? And I was thinking, this is very much like making courseware pottery, you know, from the late Bronze Age or something, versus making fine wares, you know, in Attica or in the Kerameikos or whatever. And as the technology changes and as I learn the materials, all of a sudden I get really good at it, and then I can make things that look really nice because, you know, that didn't look nice. It might have looked nice to us at the time because we didn't know any better. But then you get something like this, which is great. Let's see. Oh, you know, there's archaeology in games, like real archaeology in these games. Almost real archaeology, mind you. You guys play World of Warcraft? Some of you? Okay, I quit WoW when the pandas came out. But I don't want pandas in my game. Yeah, there's a lore question. You know, as a historian, you're working with lore within the game, and the pandas were not part of the lore. I mean, it was a joke thing in an earlier version of Warcraft that ultimately became its own race of panda bears on this island that just magically appeared in the game. And it makes no sense to me. It's no Wi-Fi. But anyway, when I can't remember if it was Wrath of the Lich King, the expansion pack in WoW that came out, which allows you to do an archaeological skill. You can train to do this, and the more archaeology you do, the better you get at it, and the more cool stuff you find. And as you find pieces as you excavate. Basically, you take out a little survey They have a theodolite or something that you use, and you go and you place it, and it's like, no, that's not right. You go over here, you place it, no, that's not right. And then all of a sudden, you triangulate and you find where the thing is buried, and you dig, and then you get a piece, and then you have to do that 27 other times to get all these other pieces, and you link them together to get. Sometimes it's junk, sometimes it's something you can fly around on, sometimes a little robot. You know, it's just really cool. And so you've got archaeology, which is not really archaeology. It's like look for stuff, put it together, and it's magic. And then this is just a list of some of the things that you can find. I'll put the slide deck up on SlideShare, and I'll have Dell send a link around just so that you can see these in better resolution. I don't know if we can dim the lights at all. Now, I played the beta for Elder Scrolls Online. With the Elder Scrolls Online, I took screen grabs. This is against the terms of service of doing the beta, but I'm showing you now. I took these pictures with my phone because doing a screen grab watermarks it with your username. So anyway, I was interested in seeing with ESO, Elder Scrolls Online, which is part of the Elder Scrolls universe. It's coming out April 4th. That really exciting because I'm going to buy an Xbox. And with something like this, This is my time to get serious. Where we believe it. I am really concerned about the reception of archaeology and archaeologists in games. How is an archaeologist perceived by a general player, and how is what we do perceived by players of these kinds of games? And stuff like this really pisses me off because you have a non-player character, an NPC here, never been in the ruins this old before. Bet there's some good stuff just lying around, free for the taking. That makes me angry. And the fact of the matter is, that as you proceed, other things happen, which is kind of scary, where you can use archaeology as a political weapon. Now, this happens in the real world, but it also happens in the virtual world, too. So you can say, we found this artifact, we can use this as political motivation to crush our enemies. Wow, okay, I'm not very comfortable with that. It's in the game, okay? And then what else do we have? We have achievements. In this case, this is Elder Scrolls Online again. Guess what? You get special points and a prize if you loot an artifact. Awesome. Not really. Again, this kind of pisses me off, but you have to do it because you need to get these things to make enchantments for your armor and weapons to make you a more powerful player. And so it bugs me that it's all about looting, it's all about theft, it's all about destruction. I just tweeted this morning to a bunch of folks, game developers should have achievements in the game where you can repatriate an artifact and get points. That would be good. And actually, in Elder Scrolls Online, there is a quest in there that allows you to do such a thing. There's a helmet that belongs to a long-dead king. I found it. You bring it to the king's body, and you have an option. I can give it back to him, or I can keep it, and it's fat loot. So fat is P-H-A-T, loot L-E-W-T. Well, you know how it is. And so what do you do? And the decision that you make affects the way the game plays farther on. So if you do the right thing, then other things happen to you. But you don't get armor. You get kudos. You might get some points or something, and then you get the undying thanks of someone who's dead. So I also was very concerned about what happens with cultural heritage sites. And we'll get to this in a minute. Actually, we'll talk about this now. In Elder Scrolls Online also, there's a linguistic system of runes where there's translation, and you have to figure these out and then combine them to make glyphs, which can then enchant your armor and weapons, which is interesting because, it's really cool to find stuff as a real archaeologist that has writing on it. Wow, it's got writing. What does it mean? And usually it's not in a complete sentence. It's a letter, or 2 letters, or 3 letters, just like that. And so you have the system, which doesn't belong to any kind of linguistic family that I can think of. I mean, it's kind of Norse-ish, but you have to experiment with different combinations in order to find out what's going on. So again, we're bringing in epigraphy to a gaming environment, which I think is pretty interesting. So we've got something like that going on. As a nod to our classics folks here in the audience this afternoon, thank you for coming. We have Latin in games too, if you didn't know. World of Warcraft, there are discussion threads and all about the Latin-y things. A lot of people who have guilds, basically collections of players in that game, they'll name their game something Latin-y. And they're going online to make the Latin correct. is this Latin right? So I don't look like an idiot with my guild name or with my player name or whatever, and so, or excuse me, tune. So you've got stuff like that. You have things in Halo that are Latin-y. I play around with machinima sometimes, and so WoW machinima allowed me to do these kind of quotes up here to have the players say. In this case, he's talking to a blood elf who happens to be a dude. We vamos me a lesbia, which is from our friend Catullus. And then we also did the first World of Warcraft machinima in Latin with Latin audio. And so this is back with Burning Crusade. Rome Total War, if you guys played Rome Total War, the first edition, there was a mod called Rome Total Realism, which allowed you to have the Roman commanders talk in Latin and give battle commands in Latin as you listened and played. So again, that's a pretty cool thing, and you can actually go in and participate in a robust modding community for those games as well as for Skyrim. Skyrim's cool because you can actually get under the hood and make not only the quest, the quest names and the quest text in Latin, but you can actually record. You can record yourself speaking the Latin, and then you can share that via the engine called Steam, which is shared free through a PC-using community, so that you can have the Latin. The interface is terrible, but you can figure it out, and so you can put in the Latin text. You can record yourself and all, and then have that come out. A dream of mine, if you guys play any of the handheld games by Sony, for example. This is Crash Bandicoot. I would love to have like a Crash Bandicoot game where I can drive over the appropriate ending that's being asked for in this particular sentence. It's kind of an e-learning thing. Why not? If I'm playing a game, I should be playing it in Latin. Maybe Ancient Greek. I don't know. But anyway, we've got that going on. With Archeo Gaming 2, it's not just archaeology in games and talking about the morality of the archaeology there. For example, one of the things I was talking to Dell about was like in Call of Duty, will there ultimately be physics where I can shell a museum, maybe by accident, maybe on purpose, or hide guys inside a cultural heritage site, and what are the moral effects of that, and what do I do as a player in those kinds of situations? And so there's something like that going on too. With Archeo Gaming also, it's an interest in the history of video games themselves. So in this case, we've got Galaga. I don't know if you guys ever played Galaga, like for reals. In the big black box that you have to go into a spooky place to play. But it's no different than a man cave, I guess. But we can now use emulators to play these old games and to experiment with them and to really kind of relive that kind of experience through something called MAME. If you guys have, this is all free, by the way. It's a video game emulator for these old school arcade games, and for those of you who have played like Sony, or Nintendo NES, there's your controller, and you can plug it in USB into your computer and play old school games and really kind of relive that recent past. We think about like going back and reliving. What was it like in ancient Rome? What was it like in ancient Greece? Well, it was probably terrible. But with something like the recent past here, we can actually do this. We can go back in time because we have the technology. I don't know if that'll be lost on some of you or not, but we've got it. One of the cool things, and I'm lucky to be here this week. I'm waiting to hear back from a guy. There's an excavation happening in Alamogordo, New Mexico. Probably in the next week or two, where they're going to be excavating something called the Atari Tomb, or the Atari Burial Ground, where, and this is myth. People thought this was myth, legend. There's no truth to this at all. Guess what? It's real. There's a landowner who allowed Atari to come with 11 dump trucks and dump all of this game, the worst game ever made. And they kept, and we know that the games are there. But there might be other kinds of technology and other kinds of records and archives and things from Atari that they put into the desert of New Mexico, capped it with cement, and then left it there for 30 years. It's been there for 30 years. And there's finally been permission given by the landowner to go and dig it up and see what's there. And people are really excited about it. And so I got contacted because I run the Archeo Gaming blog, and he's like, "You want to come out and do it?" I'm like, yeah, boy. So we will see. There's a couple of environmental questions that are left unanswered, and they're trying to get this film done for South by Southwest, which is on March 6th. So we're really pushing it. So we'll see if this happens or not. But anyway, this is real-world archaeology of computer games. You know, you can't get more meta than that, right? And so that's really kind of a segue into adventure science. And I'm doing okay on time?
10 minutes.
A few more minutes? Okay. One of the other things that I've been really fortunate to be a part of, and again, a lot of this stuff happens to me by accident, which I think is really a good way to be, where I wanted to go to North Dakota because I'd never been there before. I backpacked in every state in the continental U.S. except North Dakota, and so this was my chance to do it. And my friend Richard Rothfuss, who is the principal archaeologist and owner of Trefoil Cultural and Heritage up in he's in Minnesota, but he works in the Dakotas and Minnesota and Iowa, basically working for companies that need to excavate. You know, they need to drill for oil. They need to build structures or whatever, and so he goes in and checks the area for cultural, heritage, monuments, and looks for everything from flint, to pottery to whatever, in order to document that, perform rescue archaeology if he needs to, and then the companies come in and do their thing, which is great. And so he's like, you know what, we should go to North Dakota as part of the adventure science team and see what's happening out there. We wanted to do a transect north to south, 100 miles, and document the wilderness as Teddy Roosevelt knew it. It's still extraordinarily wild out there, and we wanted to see if there was any impact with the oil, the drilling and whatnot that's happening out in the Bakken oil fields, and if that's having an effect on anything archaeological, if it's having an effect on the ecology, the geology, and whatever. And so, we're working on the publication now, but we paired up with a team called Adventure Science, which is run out of Alberta, Canada. The owner was a PhD petroleum geologist who worked for oil companies for about 15 years. Our base camp manager, Keith Slater, still is an active worker for one of the oil companies in Canada. And so we came in as a nonpartisan group to go and explore, just to see what was there, take pictures. I brought a microphone, which is this, so I had this on trail too. It's an MP3 mic, so that we can test every hour, if there's any kind of noise pollution that's happening out there. We check for light pollution. We check for hydrogen sulfide and the like too. And so I've got some pictures from the trip here. This is what the Badlands look like where we were. It's just beautiful. It's gorgeous. It's remote. It's wild, and I'm happy to say that by and large, its wildness is still intact. And so here's Richard. We found ourselves on basically, it's almost like, I forget the name of the material. It's like kitty litter. It's what kitty litter is made out of. And so when it gets wet, it gets really muddy, it gets really slick, and so we got stuck. But in any case, he also had terrible asthma and ended up being in the control vehicle for the rest of the trip, because when it gets below freezing, which it was for most of that time, he couldn't breathe. His lungs were filling with liquid, and so he needed to keep himself warm in the truck. So he basically ran the base camp from there, ran the command vehicle. So we had 6 athletes, and with Adventure Science, about half the team are elite athletes, basically ultramarathoners, who are able to give range to remote places. So, if I'm a scientist and I want to go study something and we only have a finite time to do it, it's better to have somebody who is trained to run at speed. These people were covering anywhere from 20 to 30 miles a day in loops. I was not. I was walking the transect north to south while the athletes were running loops like this around me, and then we'd come together at the end of the day to compare our notes. And so, every hour we would stop, we'd take GPS waypoints about where we were, we'd take panoramic photos, video, do sound, document any wildlife, cultural artifacts, and the like, just to see, how things are out there. And so, here we are looking at some hoodoos. Adventure Science is not without adventure. It's not an adventure unless you're bleeding. And so, as we were exploring, these legs belong to Tim Schultz. He's an Army Ranger, and he was too cool for school. He's like, yeah, I'm not going to wear long pants out in the wild. And so he learned his lesson, and for the rest of the time he was wearing his fatigues. It was great, but the poor fellow. And so this is Tyler. Tyler's the guy I walked with. He's a medic. That's what he does full time, and he comes and he takes care of us. And so he and I were always walking the middle line. He had the backpack of medical equipment so that if anybody had an emergency, he could spin off and then go run and get them. We did find a lot of wildlife when we were out there. This is a herd of buffalo. This is in the southern unit of Teddy Roosevelt National Park where we finished up. Here's some mule deer that we spooked on the way. Up top is a golden eagle, and these are protected. Okay, and so we were able to see that wildlife is fine. You know, that it was really a delight to see. There's some paleontology that was happening also. These hills, when the rain comes or when the snow melts, things come out of the hills and roll down. And so in a lot of the creek beds, we would find, like, you know, skulls of bison, mega bison, and the like. Up there are some ancient remains from older bison there as vertebrae. We found some new art. Basically, we would come upon these pads, these oil pads that would have oil equipment, and in this case, there's a sandstone thing here, and somebody had gone and just, you know, drawn a picture, because that's what people do, right? You look at the caves, ancient cave paintings of France, there they are. You know, they've made pictures of their hands, they've made pictures of animals and whatnot, so that, you know, nothing changes. We did find a number of cow camps that had fallen into disuse, or other kinds of machinery and equipment, wagon parts and things like that, dating, you know, back, you know, anywhere from 50 to 100 years, maybe a little bit beyond. Out there, things are so dry and untouched and whatnot, it's really hard to tell, you know, how old things are, or, you know, if they're older, if they're still being used, you know, up into modern times and then finally discarded. We don't know. You know, but we were able to document these. Corrals. There's a horse corral here. We've got a cow camp here with an old fire ring here made out of a wheel of a tire, or you know, from a car. Plenty of petrified wood. This is a whole petrified tree that's been splintered. All these elements here, this is all petrified wood, and so we were able to find this just out in the wild, lying around. These roads are red throughout the Bakken and south of Williston and the western part of North Dakota. It's made out of scoria. We also call it clinker. Basically, it's coal that's caught fire and turned red, and this comes in by the truckload. So when they build oil roads, they don't pave them, but they put this on top of the mud so the trucks can get traction, because otherwise there's no way for the wheels to spin. And so they've crisscrossed the landscape now with these roads, and so we'd always come across them. And that was the only real blight that we saw, were these roads that were just totally unnaturally red. And then we would occasionally cross them and then go back into the wilderness. Petrified log. For scale, we found the other part down the other side of the hill. And so they cut that up to put the road in. And then here's an example of one of the oil pads that we came across. We found a number of these. The oil companies have gone out of their way to make them blend into the landscape. They painted them taupe so that when you looked at them on the horizon, you know, they would blend in. And you really don't see that with other kinds of oil development, but in the Dakotas, you see this quite a bit, and so that helps with the visualness. This is old oil equipment that we found that's leaking a little bit, but this was rare. We would hardly ever see this. New equipment did not leak at all and was quiet. And this is me measuring sound levels for a new piece of equipment. And again, you have to be really up on these things to hear them. And so we didn't find a lot of blight visually. We didn't find a lot of blight, you know, through our ears, and there was no pollution. There was litter from the truck drivers along the sides of the scoria roads, but that was really it. Here's a sample page from one of our notebooks that we would keep. And then I know I've got a minute left or so, but Simon Donato is the fellow up here who runs Adventure Science. There's a trek a couple of years ago to Oman to look at what happened with ancient tsunami debris, and how that affected the archaeology of Oman. And so these are just some pictures of some of the stuff that they found. I was not part of this team. Kate McComas is not here, but she wanted laser cats and Bruno Mars. So there you go. I know I'm a bit out of time, and that was a really fast presentation for 3 different things.
Let's give a round of applause
But when we go downstairs for treats, I'm happy to answer any kinds of questions that you guys have, unless you want to do questions now before they kick us out.
No, why don't we do it over 7-layer bars and hot cocoa?
So, that sounds civilized.
If we go just down the flight of stairs, there should be plenty of snacks set up for you, and Reinhard will answer your questions.